Today we're going over the best NFL wide receivers in history at every offensive skill, all the way from route running to speed demons, and of course finding out who put together all their skills in order to have the best peak at the position. Each skill will have a winner, and at the end of the video we'll count who has the most points in order to crown the most skilled wide receiver of all time. The winner may surprise you. However, we need to start with our first skill, speed. Now speed can mean a lot of things. Most think it just means being fast, but it's more than that. You have acceleration, agility, lateral quickness, all coming into effect when I talk about speed. Which is why even though this player doesn't have the fastest 40-yard dash of all time, we all know who wins this category. The Cheetah, Tyreek Hill. How Tyreek Hill was at his peak was absolutely ridiculous. The speed in which he'd get in and out of his breaks was completely unmatched, and of course, trying to catch him once he got into open space was virtually impossible. Honorable mentions go to Bullet Bob Hayes, who was literally an Olympic gold medalist. Deshaun Jackson could fly by anybody, and of course Randy Moss, who can consistently leave defenders in the dust behind them for nearly a decade and a half. But all the speed in the world doesn't move the needle if you can't break down a defender eventually in order to get open, which brings us to our next skill, route running. Here we're talking about the pure ability to get open. Route running doesn't just happen once you're down the field, it starts with the release package in order to even flow into a route, setting up a defender to go one way while you go another. And the best route runner in league history is Marvin Harrison Sr. I think he goes underrated because he was always humble and rarely ever spoke, but he was always open. Honorable mentions go to Justin Jefferson, who's just always so smooth in and out of his break, Devontae Adams as well with an insane release package, and then you have Steve Largent from back in the day too. However, just being able to get open isn't enough to be great. You also need to be able to catch the ball when it's thrown to you, which leads us to our next skill, hands. This group is absolutely stacked. Obviously, the best wide receivers of all time need to be able to catch, and they do. Some have insane hand sizes like Jerry Rice or DeAndre Hopkins, even Chris Carter. Some wear gloves in order to get better grip. Or you're Steve Largent, who never wore gloves, but when he retired, he was a leader in all-time receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. But somehow, none of those players I just mentioned above are the ones I'm going with. Larry Fitzgerald had the best hands of all time. The man retired with the second most receiving yards and second most receptions in NFL history, only behind Jerry Rice, who we'll be getting to soon. Larry had more career tackles than he did drops as a wide receiver. Honorable mentions obviously go to Jerry Rice, Chris Carter, Steve Largent, and D-Hop are all some of the best to ever do it. With that said, all wide receivers really enjoyed the last few skills we mentioned, running routes, catching the ball, but that's not all the position requires. Sometimes you have to get down and dirty and block somebody, and that will be our next skill. As the running back position started to get more and more potent in the NFL in the early 2000s, from Edgerrin James to Marshall Faulk, LaDainian Tomlinson, Priest Holmes, all the way to the bus in Pittsburgh, offenses would either have to stick an extra tight end out there to block or rely on their wide receivers to do so. And the bus out in Pittsburgh was very lucky to have the best blocking wide receiver to ever do it, Hines Ward. He would absolutely demolish people in the run game. He wouldn't care who you were, a corner, safety, linebacker, whoever he needed to kill, that's who he'd go hunt. Literally, the NFL had to make a Hines Ward rule after one of his blocks. Honorable mentions are Puka Nacua, Larry Fitz, Ed McCaffrey, Brandon Marshall, Anquan Boldin, and almost any wide receiver in the 49ers Kyle Shanahan offense. And all of those skills are great. Pushing your will on an opponent is something coaches and fans often love to see. Blocking is just one way to show that off. Another is just using your brute force strength when making a catch. And that's our next skill. Now, I've thought long and hard about this skill. Who was the strongest wide receiver of all time? Who played big? David Boston, Terrell Owens, of course. When I think of a grown man playing football, I think of only one wide receiver, Anquan Boldin. He was just bigger than everyone else, even though he really wasn't. Anquan Boldin stood at a solid 6'1", 220 pounds, which is big, but not bigger than our honorable mentions like T.O. or David Boston. Just knowing he'd always muscle up and make the catch or be able to get the back-breaking extra yard for the first down. But there's something to the magic of breaking off tackles and picking up first downs and extra yards after the catch, which happens to be our next skill in YAC. Now, YAC stands for yards after the catch. There are so many contenders for yards after the catch, it's ridiculous. All of these receivers are literal forces of nature that cannot be brought down off a one-arm tackle, and one player is separated from the crowd as the best YAC receiver ever, and that's Deebo Samuel. There is no stopping Debo in his prime. Any screen pass could and probably would be a first down play, if not more. They would put him at running back because he was so good at breaking tackles and creating advantages. His impact in 2019 and the 2022 to 2023 runs the 49ers made cannot be understated how great he was at his peak. Honorable mentions go to guys like A.J. Brown, Jerry Rice, Tyreek Hill, Randy Moss, T.O., and Steve Smith Sr. And all of that is great, but sometimes you can't just get yacked when you're up close to the end zone, or it's the end of the game and you just need to throw it up. That takes a completely different skill set, which is our next one. Jump balls, or 50-50 balls, are essentially just passes that show how much your quarterback trusts you. Does he believe this pass is no longer 50-50 and maybe 60-40, or at best a 70-30 type of pass? There's one player who completely changed the numbers so much on a jump ball, it somehow became a staple in a lot of offensive goal line sets for other teams, and that's Calvin Johnson. Matt Stafford owes about half of his total passing yards to Megatron. He would just chuck the ball down the field in a single, double, even triple covered sometimes and not care because Calvin Johnson was going to go get it. Honorable mentions are Randy Moss, Dez Bryant, AJ Green, young Larry Fitz, and Odell Beckham Jr. And now all of these skills that we've talked to up to now are great, but none of them do the most important thing, and that's put points on the board, which is the ultimate goal of offense. And so that's our next skill, touchdowns. Now you may think touchdowns isn't a receiver skill, and though you have a point there are many factors that go into it. Scheme, O-line, quarterback play. A.J. Brown would have a lot more touchdowns if it wasn't for the tush push. That is true. However, this is a skill nonetheless, having a knack for the end zone. Because some players are great with yards, but for some reason their touchdowns never match. I'm looking at you, Julio. The king here clearly is Jerry Rice. Nobody comes close. He's over 40 touchdowns clear of the next best, which is Randy Moss. Honorable mentions are Chris Carter, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, and Larry Fitz. Jerry would always find a way into the end zone, especially in the biggest game of the season, which is our next skill. Now, playoff risers are something special. Because almost anyone can dominate in the regular season, we all want to see the best play at their best when the lights are the brightest. And for that, I couldn't just pick one winner. It had to be a tie between Jerry Rice and Larry Fitzgerald. Larry in 2008 was something unlike we've ever seen before at the position. 101 yards and a touchdown against Atlanta, 166 yards and a touchdown against Carolina, cooking the Eagles for 152 yards and 3 touchdowns, all on the way to the Super Bowl, and then putting up 127 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Steelers in the Super Bowl. Jerry Rice averaged 170 yards and 2 touchdowns across his 3 Super Bowl wins. I couldn't just pick between them. They both absolutely earned this. Honorable mentions are Anquan Bolden, Julian Edelman, Michael Irvin, Lynn Swann, Reggie Wayne, and Steve Smith Sr. Playoff rising is great, but so is consistency. Can you rise even in the regular season over and over again? Becoming a dependable cog in the offense. That's our next skill, longevity. It's Jerry Rice. So these next two aren't really skills, but they both make a ton of sense. And this skill we're going to be going over is the most complete wide receiver. If you were starting a franchise today and were able to pick up one wide receiver, who would it be? My answer is Julio Jones. He had everything. Size, speed, blocking, the hands, no drama, and a leader in the locker room. His peak seasons were up there with some of the greatest we've ever seen, and he completely cemented himself as a first ballot Hall of Famer by the time his career was done, with mostly good but not great QB play, barring the one Matty Ice MVP season. But with that, we're here with our last skill, the greatest peak. Now, many wide receivers have had different peaks throughout their careers. Who was able to put together all their skills for just one season? I won't be going multi-year for this, because the king of the greatest peak to me is Antonio Brown. What he did in 2015 is something we will absolutely never see again. 136 receptions, 10 touchdowns, 1,834 receiving yards is just stupid. There is nobody touching his production in 2015, even in a stacked year with Julio, Odell, Megatron, and Brandon Marshall all going for over 1,200 yards. Honorable mentions go to Randy Moss in 2007, Megatron in 2012, Jerry Rice in that 1987 shortened season, and Jamar Chase just last year. After tallying up the totals for all those who have won in their own category, the winner is Jerry Rice with 3. Surprise, surprise. He's the GOAT for a reason. And so there you have it. The best wide receiver for every skill. But we covered everything from speed to greatest peaks and everything in between. These players are mostly on people's Mount Rushmores of wide receivers for a reason. And if you feel I left somebody out, feel free to let me know down below. Thanks again for watching.